I think we're going to get started. We'll have all our speakers on the stage. Welcome to Daytime Talks at the 92nd Street Y. I'm Christine Chen, Director of Adult Programs here. Our lectures at noon feature authors, curators, and experts in a wide variety of fields to share their work and ideas with you. We're always adding new events, so please pick up a card that's on your seat and visit us online for all the up-to-date events. I'd like to highlight a couple of events that are not in the catalog or on the cards. Coming up in July, on July 1st, we have National Book Award winner James Carroll, who will speak about his book, Warburg in Rome. And on July 8th, we have Ruth Feldstein, here to talk about Black women entertainers and the civil rights movement. Also, if you've already cleared your calendars for the day, we have a great concert going on at 2 p.m. Meryl in May, who has the record for the most appearances on the Johnny Carson show at 76. So the concert's at 2 p.m. and you can buy your tickets at the box office after this program. Today's event will last approximately 45 minutes with 15 minutes of questions and answers. Everybody please make sure your cell phones are silenced. And it's my pleasure to introduce my colleague who will be introducing the speakers today, Rabbi Dan Ain.
My name is Rabbi Dan Ain. I'm the Director of Tradition and Innovation here at the 92nd Street Y. And a little bit about what that means, tradition and innovation. That's very essential to how we understand ourselves as an institution, which is we're a 140-year-old institution, and we really take pride in finding ways to share the tradition not only with our local community but with the world as well, by taking some of the deepest values of our faith and finding ways to share it into the next generation. Now the traditions don't change, but the generations do, and the question is how do you go about continuing to make those values vibrant and relevant into the next generation. And so we've adopted a few rather interesting technological innovations over the past few years, one of which you might be familiar with is called Giving Tuesday. And that's one way that we can share a deep value of giving tzedakah, but also creating a social media meme to enable people to get on board with how to give tzedakah. One of the programs that I work on are alternative Friday night dinner experiences, and that really provides a way to reach out to people who haven't necessarily experienced the best of what a Shabbat meal can be, and also finding new ways that everyone can recapture that. And of course today we're also experiencing tradition and innovation here. One of our key values is always, it's the fifth commandment, honoring your mother and your father. I believe I'm doing that quite literally at this moment, and it's an honor. It's an honor to do that, and my uncle as well, Art. How do we do that? Some of the commandments are easier to follow than others. It's easy to know how you can, not to steal or not to bear false witness. But how to honor a parent is often something that requires a little bit of work, figuring out what is the appropriate way to do that. How do you retain a memory of your loved one who is no longer with us and keeping that into the next generation. And my parents and my uncle have been working on this project, the Living Memories Project, that seeks to innovate exactly that. How can we continue to share into the next generation some of the most meaningful experiences, memories, and lessons that our loved ones have taught us? And so it's a great honor and a privilege to welcome them here today. My father, Stewart, is going to be doing the moderating, and I'll give it over to him at this moment.
Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi Dan. Thank you, 92nd Street Y. Thank you, Christine. And thank you for coming today. I wanted to just tell you that we have with us several of the people who have contributed to the book. We have a total of 32 people who contribute to the book. And to my right, Steve and Liz Alderman, my wife Meryl, Arthur Fishman, Eileen Belmont, and Jen Chapin, and we'll hear from all of them. And Malachi McCourt told me he was going to try to come, and then at the last minute couldn't come. But if you take a look at the book a little bit later, he wrote a chapter that we call "Death is Not Fatal," and that's really that's the theme almost throughout the whole book. That you keep alive the memories of loved ones through songs, through stories, through memory quilts and photos, etc. And really, that running throughout the whole book is the idea that a person really doesn't die as long as he is remembered, and that's what we're demonstrating in this book, and my wife was the one who came up with the idea. Meryl, you want to tell everybody how this started?
Sure. My parents died within a year and a half of each other. My father first, then my mother. My mother died suddenly. And my mother was my best friend, my advisor, my confidant. And I was, 3 years later, was still trying to crawl out of my grief. And then I remembered the advice that my mother had always given me. My mother was an extremely cheerful, optimistic person, and whenever I complained that I was sad or bored, she would say, get yourself a project. And a project could be anything from cleaning out a closet to writing a book. So I enlisted the help and support of Stewart and my brother Arthur, and we started talking to people about how they moved beyond their own losses. And what we found was that there is no such thing as closure. You know, people say you'll get over it. You never get over it. Those we love are with us forever. They may not be physically present, but they're in our hearts and they're in our minds forever. And so we interviewed 32 people, and each story is a little different. Some are small tributes following a recipe. We have a woman who makes her mother's recipes on holidays, and she says, my mother's in my head and my heart. Some people do photo albums, and then we really have some very big ones, like the Aldermans will tell you about the foundation they set up in memory of their son who was killed on 9/11 at the World Trade Center. But doing the book, interviewing the people, speaking to the people was extremely cathartic and healing. I know for all of us, it gave me a different perspective on life and death, and we learned so much, and we're really very, very grateful to all the people who shared their stories with us.
Thank you, Meryl. Arthur, can you give us your insight into the project?
Sure. I've been writing for about 30 years, and this is a project I don't think I ever would have come to on my own. And as Meryl said, she lived about 5 minutes away from our mother. They were best friends. Meryl took her on appointments, on errands, and so it left a huge gap. And I would call Meryl up 2-3 years afterward, and I would innocently, on a birthday or on Mother's Day, and I would innocently ask, how are you doing? And she would say something like, well, I'm doing better this year, I only cried a little. So when she asked me to be involved in the book, that I knew it was important to her. And I usually say yes anyway, but this time I definitely said yes. And in terms of, can't hear me, I have my own. In terms of there not being closure, we also interviewed Dr. Dan Gottlieb, who's a family therapist in Philadelphia. And he told, I don't think it's in the book, but he told a wonderful story, and I've heard him tell it several times, about a friend of his, a Buddhist friend, who lost his brother. And when Dan was talking to him about this, the friend said, when he was alive, he was here for me in 50 different ways. Now he's here for me in 49 different ways. So, there's that idea that Malachi McCourt, death is not fatal. That we do keep people alive. And the other thing I learned, partly from my own experience and partly from talking with other people, is that when we pay tribute to those who have departed us, our loved ones, it is a benefit to us. I'll tell you my own story. When our father died about a year and a half before our mother, I have never been a religious person. My father was not a regular synagogue attendee, but he always had a very deep feeling for the tradition in which he had grown up. And he often spoke with great pride and respect about Judaism, and when his grandson entered the seminary, he was thrilled about that. And so I like Meryl did, I felt the need to do something, and so I started going to synagogue every day to say Kaddish, not out of any sense of religious obligation, but simply because I felt it was a tribute to my father. And what happened was I found that I liked it. I liked going every day. I saw a side of Judaism I had never seen before. I started reading Torah. I became a member of the board of trustees. I'm now I've been head of the ritual committee for the last 5 years. And I think all of this as a gift from my father, because this is something I never would have been exposed to, never would have experienced, except that's who he was. That's how I perceived him, and so that's what I did after he died.
I mentioned Malachi McCord. His chapter is about his brother, Frank McCord, who wrote the book Angela's Ashes. And I wanted to read just a section from another author in the book, Sherry Mandel. And she lost a child who was killed in a terrorist attack, 13-year-old boy Kobe Mandel in Israel. And she said, "You always carry the pain with you. It's always going to be there. Grief is energy and power, and you have to harness it. If you don't do something, it will destroy you. You have to find something within you, within the love you have for a person to continue. There is still power in the soul if you tap into it. Maybe not the soul, but in the love you have for that person, and you can take that love and use it to create something from the destruction, just like Noah, who goes out after the destruction and creates." And I wanted to ask the aldermen, you can use this mic, feel the same way after Peter's death?
There was an enormous need to do something positive. We really didn't know what to do to honor his memory. We've been married over 50 years and we never agreed on anything.
Oh, sure we did. Lots of things.
And we really didn't have a clue what to do, but the need was there. We learned that there were 1 billion people who had directly experienced torture, terrorism, and mass violence around the world. And of these people, 50 to 70% of them could no longer lead productive lives. Peter was killed because of terrorism. There was nothing that we could do for Peter. But if in his name we could return people to life, people who could no longer live their lives because of their experiences, there was no greater memorial that we could create for him.
Steve?
What she said.
How did you come about this idea?
We fell into it. Steve was talking about maybe endowing a charity university, and I was saying, that's not Pete. And I was thinking maybe a vest pocket playground. And if we had decided on either one of those things, our lives today would be quite different. But I saw a Nightline, I wasn't sleeping in those early months, and I saw a Nightline broadcast where I learned about these people who had no help to get out of their problems. I mean, Steve and I had the support and help that we needed. But this is what started us. So what we do now is we operate clinics and train local indigenous health workers to deal with the emotional wounds of victims of terrorism and mass violence. And today we run 7 clinics. We have 4 in northern Uganda where the Lord's Resistance Army operated. We opened the first mental health clinic in Liberia. We run a clinic in Kibera, which is the 2nd largest slum in Africa, in Nairobi. And we run 2 clinics in Cambodia. And Steve will be heading to Africa in a couple of weeks, and we're going to explore where we will be going next. And so we now have in the United States a staff of 7, and we have a staff of 44 people around the world who work in our clinics and for our clinics, and we don't go into a country unless the government is our partner. This is the way to sustain what we do. I just want to say one more tiny thing. I don't want to hog the conversation. Steve and I walk into a clinic in northern Uganda, and hammered into the wall is a huge, huge nail with a string hanging from it, and hanging from that string is a picture of Pete. And this is in all our clinics, and so it does our hearts so good. We wanted to leave a mark that Peter existed and that the world would be a better place because he lived, and I think we've accomplished that.
Oh, again, what she said. She's the communicator.
Steve does the business stuff, I do the emotion stuff.
Okay. Okay. I want to ask Jen Chapin. Jen is down at the other end. Your dad, Harry Chapin, you're carrying on many of the values and passions and of your dad. Can you talk about that? What? I guess the question is why? Why did you decide to do that?
Well, the unique thing with my dad, he died 33 years ago, and I'm actually reeling from several more recent losses, not of close, but it's an interesting situation because I was I was 10 when he died. I didn't have any of those complex feelings of guilt and what if that people deal with as adults or even teenagers experiencing loss. He died, as far as I know, instantly. So, he was a public person and had a huge connection with the fans of his music, and also the numerous nonprofit organizations that he had a hand in founding and funding. There were other stakeholders in his memory in keeping his music alive and keeping his legacy alive. And so I'm only one, but I happen to be a musician. and more, I think, relevantly, because as a musician, who hires a publicist and is always trying to get my name out there, inevitably half of the articles that come out say, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, or the cat in the cradle, and that's just part of the story. And the gift is that I'm happy to talk about my dad. I'm not resentful like some second generation. It's tough for maybe Bob Dylan's kid. I don't want to talk about my dad anymore, and he's alive. Ask him. But what I typically say is that my father's influence. How has your father influenced your music? That's for you to decide. You can hear. I'm sure I could say this and that. But how he's influenced me most powerfully is as an activist and as someone who sees hunger and poverty as he referred, his term was an obscenity, and an absolutely useless, stupid part of the human condition that is not to be accepted, and that you started with why, and that was his question back in the 70s when he co-founded what was then known as World Hunger Year. The acronym is why. Why hunger in a world that can feed itself many times over? So when I'm in an interview and I'm supposed to be presenting my concert and talking about my music, and then they say, well, what about your dad? And then I end up going on and on about food justice and sustainable agriculture and all these things, because it's my passion, and because music is my passion, and that's my life. But you play music, you don't necessarily talk about it forever, but talking about these issues, which his words at the time were prophetic as far as looking at root causes and looking at it's not a question of whether we have enough food, it's about a question of whether we have enough democracy. And so I can go on and on about that stuff, and it's true to me. And I think that when all these discussions are unified by the question, they say funerals are not for the dead, they're for the living. You feel an obligation to continue somebody's legacy and their impact, but ultimately it's for yourself, it's for your positivity, it's for your healing, and it's for your joy and your authenticity. And so it's more authentic for me personally not to be as, I'm a board member, and I have been very involved for 20 years with Why Hunger. And that is my connection, my ongoing living memory project with my dad. And it's a conversation that we have. But I don't go out and do tribute bands to his, that's for everybody else, on the subway, in the Dunkin' Donuts, and on Bleecker Street. I do my own music because that's authentic to me, and I do, food justice activism.
Would you honor us with a song?
Oh, yeah. So, again, this is not one of his songs. It's one of mine. When I do have a moment of sadness about the fact that my dad's not here in that one way, but he's here in those 49 ways, it's that he didn't get to be a grandpa to my two little boys. But, so this is a song I wrote for my 8.5-year-old, Maceo. But I think it speaks to this question of authenticity and joy and finding that way to move forward. Maybe I'll try and tilt the mic down a little bit. Actually, could I?
Sure.
Another stand?
Do you understand?
And then I'll get a little professional operation here. Thank you for your patience.
Little man, I can see you are not such a mystery to me. Little questions, little highs, little lows in a row, senses overflow. I've been thinking about this sad, sad world, about survival, and the one thing you should know is find your joy and let it show. Will you be bumpy like a pine cone? Cover your soft heart, try to be alone. Will you be smooth like sanded timber, wood grain winding, graceful and limber? I've been thinking about this way processed world of authenticity, and the one thing you should know is find your joy and let it show. All the slick faces on the TV, they tell us be fearful. We are warned very soberly. turn away, turn away. There's a different melody to play. I've been thinking about this sad, sad world, about survival, and the one thing you should know. I've been thinking on this fascinating world about survival, and the one thing you should know is find your joy and let it show. Let it show.
Great, thank you. Just want to ask Eileen Belmont, and you make quilts, and in your chapter you talk about a distinction between making a memory quilt for someone who has passed and making a quilt for, say, Yankees or you know, a high school team. Can you tell us what the difference is?
Sure. All my work is commission work, and when people come to me, they come to commemorate something. So if their son or sister or best friend is graduating from college, they might want to celebrate that. My niece is here. She graduated from college 3 years ago. I've yet to finish her quilt.
So she's here.
Is that why she's here? Yeah. And so those are life celebrations that are still going on. People also come to me to celebrate life in a different way, just like everybody here has been talking about, celebrating the memory of somebody, keeping it alive. So the very first commission I had was in 1986, when the youngest child of the next people who grew up across the street from me, he died of AIDS. And the three sisters and the parents commissioned me to make a quilt for Butch, and it's in the AIDS names project that's all over, travels. And so they told me about the things that he was involved with. He was a young junior representative to a Republican convention. Which one? I don't remember. He was a volunteer fireman. He did magic tricks. So all those things are on the quilt. And so, does that answer your question?
Yeah, so, but when you say there's a difference in I guess, the material, or it's something precious about, yeah.
People give artifacts. I brought with me the small wall hanging that is pictured in the book on page 20-something. My mother died at the end of 2007, and even though I started doing this professionally full-time in 2007. That's when I left my paycheck job to focus on my art full-time. I was not able to do anything with Mom's things for about 3 or 4 years. So it was just a couple years ago that I made this.
Oh, so because you write in the book that you couldn't, so since that story, you've actually been able to do it.
Yeah. So this is, my parents had a summer home in Martha's Vineyard. Everybody went to it in the summer. And this quilt is really for my 3 daughters. It's a picture of pictures of photo transfers of Grandmom and Grandpop at the Martha's Vineyard house, because that's my daughter's and my nieces and nephews' favorite summer memories. And so it has pictures of the kids when they were little, my parents' sailboat, just pictures from that. My mother's t-shirt. My mother was an avid tennis player. This is a t-shirt that was painted by an artist friend of my parents from Martha's Vineyard. And so these are things made, this is made from things that belonged to my family or to my mom. Yeah.
You also said you were hesitant because some people were a little put off by
Yes.
such things.
Yes. I was even at different times curious about how people could be so straightforward. I had a woman come to me, she called me, she said, my mom died 10 days ago, can you make a quilt using her things for me? And I thought, 10 days ago, I haven't even been able to use my own mother's things in a quilt because it was just still too active. And I met her, she lived in Albany or someplace, and we met in a hotel off the Pennsylvania Turnpike, and she brought her things, and as she started to talk to me, I started to love her. At first, I wasn't so sure what I thought about her because it just seemed too raw, too soon. And her mother had been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. Her mother was a nurse, she was a nurse, and my mother died of pancreatic cancer but did not have an early diagnosis. And so this woman told me how she took leave from her job and moved in with her mom and dad and spent 4 months with them. And I thought, wow. And she said, I had all this time for closure, all these conversations happened. And so of course she was ready after 10 days because she had processed all this already. And she said, so she met me, she cried. We met again about 5 weeks later when I completed this quilt for her, and I made pillows out of her mother's sweaters to be decorative pillows on her couch. And she cried, as the people often do when I deliver their things. She said, I can't believe I met you. I can't believe that this just gave me something to hold on to.
Let me just open it up to the floor. Yes?
I'm familiar with I was a child from Lower Merion that came to the school play, do you remember?
Mm-hmm.
Why don't you talk about that a little bit with the t-shirts and
Okay, yeah, Mom contacted me. Her daughter had taken ill after her junior year in high school and never got out of the hospital. And this child was someone who everybody loved. She was popular, she was active, she was bright, she was electric. And I never knew her, but that's what, and people told me that they knew of her. And so the entire, actually I made 2 quilts. The mother had given me so many things, so many articles of her daughter's clothing that I could not put it all in one quilt. I didn't really have, I made it into 2 smaller quilts. And so every single thing on it is made out of her daughter's clothing. What else, Janet?
there were school plays.
Yeah, Allison, do you want to say? No? Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I'm going to start out by asking a question. I was just so touched by the Aldermans and by the story in the book, and then we found out that you won the Purpose Prize. You won. You met with President Obama. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Before I do that, I just want to say one thing. When you were talking about seeing somebody 10 days after her mother had died, everybody grieves differently. And no matter how close your family is, everybody grieves alone because it is a different experience for everybody. And just to get technical for a minute, one of the things that we did not know when we started this work for Peter was a study that was done on the Thai-Cambodian border in an internally displaced persons camp. And it was a study sponsored by the World Health Organization, WHO, and it was a year-long study of 1,000 families. And they wanted to know what mitigated against depression and what helped to build resilience in people. And a lot of the problems in the camp caused tremendous grief for everybody. And the 3 things that they learned were work, altruism, and spirituality. And we didn't know this when we started our work for Pete, but it was the work that gave me reason to get out of bed every day. You can't cry when you're sitting at the computer because you get the keys wet and you can't see the screen. The altruism is, I never thought I was ever going to feel good about anything ever again, and I feel so good about the work that we're doing, and I feel so privileged to have met the people that have come into Steve's and my life because of the work. And the spirituality, of course, that is something that's very personal to everybody. Say something.
The Purpose Prize is like the MacArthur Award for old people. True. You have to be over 60 to get it. And it's for people who change direction in their lives, change careers, and there and make a contribution. Liz likes to say, she pushes it a little bit, that we're as common as dirt. That really the only reason why we have succeeded in doing what we've done is because of our passion. And in part, I don't disagree with it. I also think it's because of luck. We made some very good partnerships with some institutions here in the United States and governments around the world, and also because we've worked very hard. We work 7 days a week. We really do. And why don't I give it back to you? You talked about Obama.
Really asked about Obama.
Yeah.
What about, we have a picture in the book.
Oh, okay.
Go ahead.
The main thing we do with our time, though, is kiss frogs, because we're constantly fundraising. But we were shocked and pleased because we, besides the Purpose Prize, we also won the Presidential Citizens Medal. And that is a medal that is given by the White House, by the executive branch, to people who have, for me. So we got to go to the White House, we got to meet Obama, I got hugs, and the White House makes the very best chocolate chip cookies.
Thank you, thank you.
And that really, I guess, is the essence of the book. We believe that people reading the book will have comfort from the book, especially people who had just experienced a loss, because it will see, it helps them to channel their grief into doing something positive. Or even if you had a loss years ago, because people say, they think about it, and well, I'm thinking Jack Klugman, when I asked him about how do you remember Tony Randall, he said now they weren't related, but they worked together on the stage for more than 30 years, and he said basically I put his picture up all over the house, and we talked to Linda Johnson Robb, and I said, well, tell me about what do you do to remember your parents? And she said, I remember, and she talked all about her mother, about how basically she carries on her mother's love for the wildlife preserves and wildflower preserve, and she has a little story there about how she kept alive the memory of her mom for her friends. So I commend that to you as well. Other questions? Yes.
This is for Jen. Jen, I had lunch with your father the day he was killed. My husband was playing golf with him that afternoon, and he came in late, and as always, he's in a hurry, so he sat down with me and said, I'm going to grab some lunch before I run out to the golf course. So we were probably the last two people who saw your father. My husband went to his memorial. I'm sorry that I didn't go at the time. It was 11 hours. I was almost going to send the police because I didn't know what happened to my husband. He said nobody wanted to leave. My husband is chairman of the Long Island Philharmonic because of your father. He is breaking his back to keep that orchestra alive because of your father. So, regards to your mom, we just saw her recently, but we play his records. I mean, we never forget him.
I'm so glad the Long Island Philharmonic is still going strong, because that was
Struggling, and
in the months and years after he died, there was multiple charities that he kept afloat, and one in particular which he had earlier tried to mortgage our house for, which some people intervened. They didn't think that was a good idea. But the Performing Arts Foundation, which is a community theater in Long Island,
Right.
and when that folded, I don't know if it was within the year, it was like another death for my mother. So it's wonderful that Long Island Cares, Why Hunger, Long Island Philharmonic have kept going strong.
if we could talk to your father, we would say we need him now, because every time anybody needed money, he would just have a concert. And, but, you know, we want to keep that alive. We want to keep the music alive, playing on Long Island in his memory.
Rabbi Dan.
Yeah, I have a question for Stewart. In writing this book, you lost both of your parents, and you've made a career as sort of an objective journalist, just the facts, interviewing others. I'm curious to know throughout this process how it helped you in your own grieving process and the way you think about your folks.
I don't know. It was interesting because I would talk to, one of the first people I talked to was Malky McCourt, because Meryl had just read the book, Angela's Ashes, written by Frank, and then Frank died. So I called Malky just a few weeks afterwards. I mean, in fact, you read the book and he says, Frank just died. And the whole idea that, you keep alive the spirit of the people. And I guess that was a comfort, that you don't really die if you keep remembering the people, They shouldn't be forgotten. And so I guess perhaps that's the answer. Yes?
We touched on this a little bit. I'm interested to know your perspective. I'm a writer and a journalist, and I write about grief and loss. And one thing that always comes up with people I write for, who are parents who are raising kids who won't know their grandparents who have passed away, is feeling like you can never do enough. That there's something that the void is so big, and that you can never relay words enough in a song, or words that they may have spoken that might have been particular to their personality or their, good sense of humor. And feeling like that no matter what you do, no matter what quilts you make or what have you, there still is that vacuum that you can't fill. And I'm wondering what your perspective is on that for the parent who's trying to fill that gap for their children.
Well, that's, I would look at it, I would turn that around and look at it in a different way and say that whatever you do perpetuates the memory. Whatever small thing you do keeps the memory alive. So there's a woman in our book whose father, actually both her parents, died when her children were a baby and toddler, and she said, she didn't think, she thought one of them maybe remembered them a little bit, but the other one couldn't have possibly remembered them at all. And she made a memory book, and she said, I want them to remember my father not just for what they didn't have, but for what they had. So she put pictures of her father dressed up as Santa Claus with the little kids, and she said the amazing thing is that the whole family looks at it, and the youngest daughter, who can't possibly remember these things, thinks she remembers them. So in that way, she keeps the memory alive. Another thing is, I mentioned recipes at the beginning, by making special dishes, by saying, that this is somebody's special dish. We have also sayings, advice. There's my secretary, her mother had this saying, love many, trust few, always paddle your own canoe. And this was long before my mother ever died, and at least 3 or 4 times a week this came up in our office. She would say, remember my mother saying, love many, trust few, always paddle your own canoe. And that was her mother's advice that she lived by. But what I would definitely do is I would encourage young parents to, you know, if their parents are still alive, to talk to them, to video them, to make books of their ideas, and you know, so just keep it. Are you the one who told me that you have every recipe, every yeah?
You finally found them after we had redone our kitchen, and my mother wrote recipes, but you don't know how she wrote them. She wrote them on scraps of paper, and sometimes they went then this way, and then you had to go turn the paper around like this because she ran out of room. And I had put them in a bag, plastic bag, and I couldn't find it. And just recently, before one of the holidays, I found them. And I'm still trying, you know, they're still reading them like this, but they're there. And we do make her noodle pudding and a lot of the things that she does. And
Carla?
I have a question about these people that you wrote about how you decided you were going to interview the Rosenberg boys, because they have a connection to where I live, in Tom's River, and I have friends that they went to school with that were sort of devastated when they were ripped from the community, and they were fascinated to read about them. Because they had lived in Tom's River originally. So how did you come about deciding? Did you seek after them, or did you?
No, we sought out them. I have had a very long-term fascination with the Rosenberg case.
Explain who the Rosenberg.
Okay, for those who don't know, Julius and Ethel Rosenberg were convicted and executed as spies against the United States of America, I believe in 1953, during the height of the McCarthy era. And at the time, they had two young sons. They were 6 and 9 years old. And so we don't often think that those children lost their parents. And there's been a lot of revisionist history. I was a history teacher at one point. And I've just been fascinated with this. There's been a lot of revisionist history and different ideas about the Rosenbergs. And I think the latest, and I think Robert Meryl, who changed his name, thinks that, you know, probably Julius was guilty and Ethel was not. She was just protecting her husband, but the secrets they had were not really such high-level secrets. But anyway, so I was always fascinated with this, and a family, Anne and Abel Meryl, finally adopted them. They were bounced from house to house for a long time, and Abel Meryl was a very left-wing, successful songwriter, and
he wrote "Strange Fruit."
Oh, really?
Yeah,
okay.
Which everybody, people think really
successful, and the boys, I understand, did live a comfortable life, but they had, you know, they had that huge trauma. So in fact, Daniel, Rabbi Dan, right about when you were a baby, I was on a Rosenberg reading binge, and so
it all makes sense.
It all makes sense. Nothing, everything comes together. So we were just kind of brainstorming about people who had losses, and at the same time, Stewart, somebody had interviewed Robert Meryl, somebody that he doesn't. I remember. He doesn't remember things. Somebody he knew had just interviewed Robert Meryl, so we got the contact information, spoke to his publicist, and he was more than happy to do it. Very, very, very gracious. And he says in the book, you know, he had this loss when he was 6 years old, and it really took him until age 43 to decide what he wanted to do. But what he really knew that he always wanted to do was to associate his parents' names with something good, rather than just they were executed as spies against the United States. So what his foundation is called, the Rosenberg Foundation or Fund for Children, and they help children whose parents get in trouble with the law or for political activity, and so he feels that this is very healing to him, and he's very happy that he does this. And that he lives in the Boston area, and that's where the foundation is based.
Yes, in the back.
I have a comment that will segue into a question. About a year or two after my mother died, about 7 years ago. Through circumstances, I started family reunions. I have met about 30 cousins that I never knew before. And it's maternal. And I keep saying to myself, my mantra is, if Mom only knew. Because some of those people were her first cousins, women in their 80s now. In addition to that, I have dedicated one wall in my home. All right, where I take the older the better, family photographs and family documents framed and put up on that wall. And when I stand there and look at these items, I see my own reflection. I actually wrote a poem about this, and I'm not a poet, but I wrote a poem about this, and I'm sorry I didn't bring it. But as I look at these people, what goes through my mind is, I am them, they are me. And my question is, that I will segue into, what this has done, generally speaking, is it's made my older sister and I much closer in our relationship. Stewart, how has this affected the relationship with Howard?
Oh, my brother. Well,
Your twin brother.
right.
His
yes,
identical twin brother.
Well, actually, it was my brother who led us to the publisher of our book, because I guess it was it shortly after my father died. Mother died, father died. They died within 4 or 5 months of each other, and I see my sister here, Roberta, and it was really we told them about the project. I guess we may have. Do we have a manuscript? I don't remember.
We did.
But we had our own little, and so I told him about the book. He said, well, I know somebody who just had a book published. Let me get in touch with the publisher. He gave the book to the husband of the publisher, and his wife was basically at the bedside of her dying mother. And he said, you have to read this, and she did. And
the rest is history. Yes.
I haven't read the book yet, I should, because I'm in the family also, but my sense is that it's probably a Western Judeo-Christian book. Any thoughts of a sequel where you really go, deal more with the
we would be more than delighted. We really were looking for a Buddhist. We were looking to be as ecumenical as we could possibly be. I mean, clearly we know a lot of Jewish people, but we have, I think we have a good representation, but we would definitely, if you know anybody, please let us know, because I do think, especially the Buddhist perspective, would be quite illuminating.
Reincarnation and things like that.
Yes.
This is addressed to probably, I'm going to say parents or grandparents. Neither my late husband nor I have much information about my father and my father-in-law's side of the family, because both mothers were joyous, angry, and my mother-in-law specifically was when she was dying, she tore up her abdomen. So, I'm jealous that you can find them, but I can't. I did some work with Ancestry and I found one little fact, but that's it.
yeah, in fact, we have a chapter with Arthur Kurzweil, who is the, I guess, Jewish genealogist, and he talks all about going back and looking at the Ancestry.com and all the all the different ancestry websites, and he said that he knows, he said he has conversations with the ancestors more than he does some of the living people, so that he can really get into it. Well, listen, I thank you so much for coming. This has really been very
Thank you. And thank you to our guests, Liz and Steve Alderman, Jen Chapin, Eileen Belmont, and three of us. We really appreciate your coming and telling your stories and sharing them. And thank you all so much for coming.
And the book is available right on a table.
And if there aren't enough books, it is on Amazon as well.